All right, Gaming Morning Show continues. Thanks for being with us as we are set to talk to the science editor at CNET. Let's welcome in Dr. Jackson Ryan to the program. Appreciate taking the time to join us today and talk about this story. This is about the next-gen consoles, which has kind of been a topic, right, for months and months and months. But you brought us a different perspective looking at the idea of energy consumption and kind of the impact on energy that these consoles are going to have. The headline is PS5, Xbox Series X, and climate crisis facing next-gen video games. So let's start with kind of where you predicted that there would be more energy consumption, and now that we're finally starting to see these systems out in the world, what you found. What did you learn about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really, I guess, long time in the making, and it's really great. The first thing to say is it's really great that the consoles are out and that I was able to do this kind of with not necessarily the backing of Microsoft and Sony, but at least with them sending sort of review consoles out to do it with. The tests are on the final product, but essentially what I wanted to do was look at how energy consumption in the new consoles, I guess, kind of reflected their environmental impact in this one very specific way. And product use is, at least in home consoles, is the sort of biggest generator of carbon emissions. So I wanted to use energy as a proxy for carbon emissions. Now, there's a huge caveat there, and that is that, for where you are in the world, your energy mix is probably different to where I am in Australia. Like, it's probably not that different perhaps for you and I, but for instance, in Canada, they have hydro, they have nuclear. Down here where I am, we use brown coal a lot. But in Tasmania, further south, they use hydro entirely. They're completely renewable there. So if you're playing a home console in Tasmania, you're not generating any carbon. But if you're doing it where I am, then you are. And that's kind of the one big caveat about all of this research, is that it kind of depends on where you are in the world. But I still think doing the energy use and getting the data gives you a really clear understanding of potentially how home consoles might affect the planet.
There's one line that stood out to me, and we'll link the story in the chat and through our Twitter and such, but you wrote, an hour of play in Spider-Man Miles Morales is equivalent to charging your smartphone 18 times. And for someone like me who doesn't have an analytical brain, doesn't think in a science means, that was a really good equivalency for me, because I can think about how often I charge my cell phone, and then to do it 18 times more really put it in perspective for me. That doesn't seem insignificant when you look at it from like a piece of electronic equipment versus another piece of electronic equipment. So what do you think we should be mindful of? You look at that gap between the PS4 and the PS5 was roughly 7 years from release. What do you think we should be mindful of when you look at next-gen consoles over the next 7 to 10 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the Miles Morales equivalency is kind of a really interesting thing to look at when you don't have an analytical brain, and it's interesting for me as well, because I didn't come at this with any sort of idea that it would, like, I assumed it would be higher, but if it wasn't, I'd be happy, and I'd be thankful, because that would suggest to me that the the manufacturers are driving energy use down and improving efficiencies, and that's really where they have to go in the next 7 to 10 years. Like, if we talk about climate change and the climate crisis, this decade is really the most important one for sort of arresting our carbon output, and video games have to play a part in that. And I guess to come back to the Miles Morales example, while that does seem significant when you compare it to a smartphone, perhaps if you compare it to a fridge, it doesn't. So we've got this kind of this situation at the moment where we don't really understand how much our consoles are using in comparison to our other appliances. And the best thing to do, the first thing to do should just be to give us that data and say, consumers, this is what you're getting when you buy a console. This is how much energy it's going to use. And it's important for consumers because it costs money. And if consumers can say, oh, okay, well, actually, if I buy this console, I'm going to be spending an extra 30, 60, 90, $100 a year, or whatever it is, on my power bill. I think that's the most important thing, because that's where what consumers care about right now. They don't necessarily care about the environmental footprint of these consoles.
We're talking to Jackson Ryan about this article for CNET, just looking at next-gen consoles and energy consumption. And because we're at PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and this next iteration of these, and everyone's excited about them, everyone wants to play them, no one can get them in stock, I kind of see this having no end in sight, in the sense that there's really no reason, unless something changes dramatically, that maybe Microsoft nor Sony is going to make another one, correct? So I see that I see this idea of like, can this be sustained? Like, who has to sacrifice? How can gaming be sustained if energy consumption is continuously just going to go up?
Yeah, I mean, it's another great question. And the idea that energy consumption will continue to go up is, I think, we can kind of um, maybe not lock ourselves into, but we can sort of say that's probably what's going to happen if there is a PS6 and an Xbox, whatever they call it. That's really confusing and no one understands. But if that is the case, if energy does go up, well, then we've actually got to really start thinking about how our infrastructure works in different places around the world. Like as I was saying before about different energy mixes, we're actually going like it's not necessarily that it's on Microsoft and Sony to make their consoles more sustainable. It is. They should do that. But there's also wider social issues, there's wider cultural issues. We need to really address this from all angles. And I think one of the major points, and I get a lot of abuse when I write stories like this, is that because it's seen as if I'm trying to stop games. I don't want to stop games. I play games. Why would I want to stop games? It's just that we at least need to recognize that there's something here. And hopefully, if we recognize it and point it out, then the companies like Microsoft and Sony will say, all right, there is an issue and it's important to consumers. So we want to change our tact and we're going to do that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when I write these things. Not take our games away. We don't want to play games. They're too dangerous for the planet.
I did notice that it looked like BRs and potentially maybe cloud gaming could also be a little more energy intensive, while your indie games actually were kind of a bright spot, it seemed like, at least in some of the comparisons you did.
Mm-hmm.
What do you attribute to with the BRs and cloud gaming potentially having that energy consumption increase?
Yeah, it's really important when looking at energy use to look at different games and different forms as well. And I think that's one of the things that maybe has been lost a little bit in the journey now, because we're talking about kind of the next generation. And what's the next generation from here? Will it be a lot of cloud gaming, a lot of streaming games? Will there be different platforms that we use? And if cloud gaming's worse, then should we be trying? Maybe we should be trying to build another home console that is better and more energy efficient. So I think the indie titles comparison is another good one. With what I tested was Dead Cells. Dead Cells, I'm sure the watchers and listeners know, like Dead Cells is a 2D sort of side scroller roguelite game where the comparison between, say, playing it on the Switch and playing it on the Xbox Series X isn't huge because of its aesthetic. Like it looks pretty much the same, even if you have super 4K pixels on one and 720p on the other. It still looks beautiful because that's how it's designed. And if you look at how much energy it's using on the Switch, it's kind of 10 times less than what it's using on the Series X. So where does that 10 times extra energy come from, and why is it important to bring that down? That's kind of the questions I want to ask. Like we should ask Microsoft or Sony why it has to be 10 times higher. Is it because of background processes on the console? Is it anything like, is it to do with things that are happening in the background? If so, can we tamp those down? And then everyone's playing Dead Cells with sort of much less energy consumption / how much carbon they are emitting. So I think indie titles, yeah, we definitely should celebrate them. And potentially they're a model for us to say, well, we can still make great experiences even with energy efficient development and code. And I think that's a really important point when we look to the future.
All right, you said it. You're a gamer. What are you gaming on right now? What's got your attention?
I'm also a journalist and have no time, and I'm a science journalist. So I've been writing about the coronavirus since January 9. I think that was the day it first sort of hit for me. I'm looking just over now. So I've been playing Fallen Order with Xbox Game Pass, Jedi Fallen Order. So I feel like maybe I'm a year behind. But Dead Cells actually, well, the reason I tested Dead Cells is because I came to it very late. I only came to it sort of at the middle of this year, and I was like, man, this game's really good. And I noticed that it was on all the consoles, so it provided that kind of perfect test platform for me. And I'm still playing it. So I legitimately go through Dead Cells, so I'm really excited for their I think they've got a DLC coming out very soon. So yeah, that'll probably keep me occupied until the end of the year. And I haven't got into the new consoles yet. I've only been able to test them. So hopefully, maybe next year I'll think about it. I mean, some people don't even want to buy them because of their energy use. And that's an interesting thing. But also, they can't get them even if they did want to buy them because they're sold out everywhere. So.
Yeah, set up the stock alerts, and someday I will say kudos to you for keeping people informed about coronavirus. Hope everyone on your side of the world stays safe as possible, and certainly appreciate your time joining us this morning. Hopefully your stack of shame, as I've been told it's referred to, goes down as the months go ahead. Jackson, Ryan, thanks so much for joining us on Gaming Morning Show.
Appreciate it, mate. Thanks so much.